There is a truth older than the stones beneath our feet. The body and soul are not estranged siblings, but rather woven together as one. What nourishes the body does not merely pass through the veins, it whispers to the soul, strengthens its defenses, and aligns it with the unseen order of the divine. If there are forces of darkness subtle and insidious, creeping like shadows at dusk, then surely there are also weapons fashioned in the hearth of creation itself, weapons that do not shine with the cold glint of steel, but rather rest humbly upon our tables. Throughout history, civilizations have recognized that certain foods are not merely sustenance, but sanctuaries. The ancients, though lacking the vocabulary of modern science, understood a truth we have long neglected. What we consume shapes not just our flesh, but our very being. In times of peril, when whispers of unseen adversaries troubled the hearts of men, they turned not only to prayer, but to the bounty of the earth, the gifts that bore within them divine protection. Consider salt, that simple yet incorruptible crystal. The old ones knew of its preserving power, not only for meats and grains, but for the spirit. It was cast upon thresholds, mixed with holy water, and taken with reverence, for it was said to drive out the presence of that which sought to unmake goodness. And honey golden, unspoiled by time, has been a token of blessing, a shield against corruption. It was no accident that lands of peace and promise were likened to those flowing with milk and honey. These were not merely places of abundance, but of purity, where darkness found no resting place. Then there is bread, the most common of all provisions, yet sacred in its very essence. It has been broken at sacred tables, received in rituals that lift the heart from the mundane to the eternal. Where there is true bread, there is life, and where there is life, the schemes of the malevolent wither. Garlic, too, though cast aside as folklore by the learned of today, was once regarded as a fierce protector. Its pungency was thought to offend not only the senses, but the spirits that lurked in the unseen. It was no mere superstition, for even now we recognize that nature often encodes truth in the very design of things. The bitter is often the curative, the strong is often the safeguard. And what of oil? Pressed from the fruit of the olive, it has anointed kings and warriors alike, sealing them against harm. It is no wonder that it was poured over altars and foreheads, a sign of divine favor, a barrier against that which sought to disrupt the order of light. These are not idle traditions, nor the relics of a bygone age. They are lessons, inscribed not on parchment, but upon the very fabric of existence. The war waged against the soul is seldom seen with the eyes, but it is fought nonetheless. And in such a battle, every warrior must know the power of the provisions given to him. So eat with wisdom, for the table is not just a place of feasting, but of fortification. What you consume is not only for the strength of your limbs, but for the guarding of your soul. For in the bread, in the salt, in the honey and oil, there is more than mere nourishment. There is the echo of a greater truth, one that reminds us that even in the simplest things, the divine has left us weapons against the encroaching dark. The idea that the physical world and the spiritual world are deeply intertwined is one that has been echoed throughout history, in both sacred traditions and the quiet observations of those attuned to the unseen. The notion that food can serve as more than mere sustenance is not a relic of folklore, but a reflection of a profound truth, one that acknowledges the invisible currents that shape human existence. Just as the body requires nourishment to sustain itself against weakness and disease, the soul, too, must be fortified against forces that seek to corrupt, weaken, or ensnare. And this fortification, though often assumed to be the domain of prayer and meditation alone, is found even in the simple act of eating. Throughout human civilization, the recognition that certain foods possess a power beyond their physical properties has been nearly universal. Ancient societies, though diverse in culture and belief, shared an understanding that what one consumed could affect not only the body, but the spirit. From the temples of the East to the cloisters of the West, from the deserts where prophets walked to the forests where mystics meditated, there existed a common thread: the awareness that unseen forces, both good and ill, interacted with the material world in ways beyond human perception. It was never merely about avoiding hunger, it was about partaking in something sacred, something that could serve as a barrier against the encroachments of malevolent influences. There is a reason that certain foods have been regarded as protective, and this is not merely a matter of folklore or cultural superstition. The idea that some substances possess the ability to repel spiritual afflictions arises from an age-old understanding of the way the universe is structured. If darkness is a force that moves subtly, creeping through the weaknesses of the unwary, then surely there exist counterforces, elements imbued with the properties of preservation, purification, and defense. These are not simply things to be ingested for their nutritional value, but rather elements that operate as barriers, shielding the soul just as a stronghold protects those within its walls. Consider the way that light and darkness are spoken of in both metaphorical and literal terms. Darkness does not have substance of its own, night is merely the absence of light. Likewise, spiritual corruption does not exist in isolation. It is the absence of divine presence, the hollowness left when goodness has been displaced. Holy foods, in this sense, are not merely defensive weapons, but bearers of a kind of spiritual illumination. They carry within them a connection to the sacred, reinforcing the soul against that which seeks to unmake it. Just as a lamp is placed in a house to drive away the shadows, these foods are consumed to ensure that the soul remains a place of light rather than an empty void where darkness may take root. It is not a coincidence that many of the foods traditionally associated with spiritual protection are also those that resist decay. Salt, for instance, has been used since ancient times, not only to preserve food, but to symbolize incorruptibility. It is no mere seasoning. It is a guardian, a substance that stands against the natural process of spoilage and degradation. To partake of salt is to align oneself with that which endures, that which does not succumb to corruption. And what is corruption, if not the slow unraveling of what was once whole? If darkness seeks to degrade, to diminish, to erode, then the act of consuming that which resists such forces is itself a statement of defiance against that which would seek to undo what is good. Likewise, honey, a substance that never spoils, has been revered not only for its sweetness, but for its purity. It is as though it has been imbued with a timeless quality, existing outside the natural order of decay. The ancients recognized this and saw in honey not just a delicacy, but a symbol of divine favor, a substance that carried within it the very essence of incorruptibility. To consume it was not just to enjoy its taste, but to partake in something that bore the mark of eternal preservation. When one is under spiritual attack, when unseen forces seek to chip away at the strength of the soul, is it any wonder that honey was among the first remedies offered? Then there is the matter of bread, a food so fundamental that it has been woven into prayers, rituals, and divine ordinances across cultures. Bread sustains, yes, but it also represents continuity, the passing down of wisdom and provision through generations. Where there is bread, there is community, and where there is community, there is strength. To break bread with another is not simply to share a meal, but to partake in something sacred, a reaffirmation of bonds that protect against the isolation that spiritual forces so often seek to exploit. For darkness does not attack in the open. It works in secrecy, in separation, in alienation. But bread is a force of unity, a substance that draws people together. And in that gathering, there is resistance against all that would seek to divide. Spiritual resistance, then, is not merely a matter of prayer or ritual alone. It is a holistic effort, one that encompasses all aspects of life, including the seemingly mundane act of eating. Holy foods are not magical talismans, nor are they superstitions born of ignorance. They are, rather, instruments of divine wisdom, tools that serve both the body and the soul, reinforcing the barriers that keep malevolent forces at bay. They remind us that we are not merely creatures of flesh and bone, but beings who exist within a reality far greater than what can be seen with the eye. To consume these foods with awareness is to recognize the deeper reality of existence, but the battle against darkness is not fought solely in the realm of thought or belief, but in action, in discipline, in the everyday choices that shape the soul. It is to acknowledge that what we put into our bodies matters, not just for our physical health, but for the strength of our inner being. It is to take seriously the idea that resistance is not a passive state, but an active stance, one that requires vigilance, intention, and wisdom. Throughout history, food has been more than a mere necessity for survival. It has carried within it layers of meaning, symbols that transcend the physical and reach into the spiritual. The ancients did not see meals as simple acts of consumption, but as interactions with forces beyond human comprehension. In sacred texts, myths, and oral traditions, we find that certain foods were not only regarded as nourishment, but as divine messengers, infused with significance that extended beyond their material composition. These foods were often seen as carriers of blessings, shields against corruption, and instruments of spiritual power that could repel darkness and reinforce the soul's connection to higher realms. Salt, for example, is one of the oldest and most universally recognized sacred substances. It is not merely a seasoning, but a symbol of preservation, purity, and incorruptibility. It was used in covenants, sprinkled upon offerings, and even placed at thresholds to protect against unseen forces. Salts, enduring nature's resistance to decimate it, a potent metaphor for spiritual steadfastness. To consume it was to partake in something unyielding, something that resisted the forces of disintegration. It was believed that just as salt preserves food from spoiling, it also preserves the soul from corruption. This belief was so widespread that even in cultures that had little direct contact with one another, salt emerged as a common element in spiritual rituals. Bread, too, is more than a staple of physical nourishment. It represents sustenance not only for the body, but for the soul. In various traditions, bread has been elevated to a sacred status, woven into religious rites and divine ceremonies. It is the ultimate symbol of provision daily, reliable, and life-sustaining. In times of famine or hardship, the presence of bread signified divine care, a tangible expression of abundance where there was lack. But beyond sustenance, bread also carries the weight of communion and unity. It is broken and shared, creating bonds that transcend mere survival. To eat bread with another is to enter into a covenant of peace and fellowship, reinforcing a communal spirit that strengthens against forces that seek to divide and weaken. Honey, golden and unspoiled by time, has long been associated with divine favor and spiritual purity. Unlike many other foods, honey does not decay, and its sweetness makes it a natural symbol of blessings, enlightenment, and divine wisdom. It was often used as an offering to the gods, a gift that signified harmony between the earthly and the divine. The idea of a land flowing with milk and honey was not merely a statement of prosperity. It was a promise of a place untouched by the forces of spiritual desolation. Honey's association with incorruptibility made it an important element in sacred anointing and healing, reinforcing the belief that what is pure and undefiled can act as a shield against spiritual contamination. Garlic, though often dismissed as mere folklore in modern times, carries deep spiritual symbolism. Its strong aroma and potent nature made it a natural candidate for warding off unseen evils. The idea that certain foods could repel darkness was rooted in the understanding that nature often encodes spiritual truths within the physical world. The pungent, almost aggressive essence of garlic was believed to offend malevolent entities, much like how a righteous life repels corruption. Many ancient traditions prescribed garlic not just for its medicinal benefits, but as a form of spiritual armor, reinforcing the idea that what is bitter and strong often serves as the best protector against current forces that seek to weaken and deceive. Oil, particularly olive oil, has long been recognized for its sacred properties. It has been used to anoint kings, priests, and prophets, marking them as chosen and set apart. The act of anointing with oil was not just symbolic, but was believed to confer divine protection and favor. In many cultures, oil was poured over sacred objects and altars, signifying consecration and the establishment of a spiritual barrier. To consume oil was to partake in something that bore the mark of divine selection, reinforcing the idea that food could carry within it spiritual potency. The olive tree itself was often seen as a symbol of peace and resilience, its fruit providing sustenance that was not only beneficial for the body, but for the soul's endurance against trials and adversities. Wine, another significant holy substance, was more than a drink. It symbolized transformation, the movement from the mundane to the divine. The process of fermentation, where grapes are crushed and left to age, was seen as a metaphor for spiritual refinement trial, leading to transformation, bitterness giving way to richness. In many traditions, wine was associated with the sacred, used in rituals that signified renewal and divine connection. It was often consumed in acts of remembrance, linking the drinker to a deeper reality beyond the physical. To partake in wine was to participate in a mystery, an acknowledgement that life itself is shaped by both suffering and joy, both struggle and celebration. Herbs, and spices too, were not merely culinary additions, but bore spiritual significance. Frankincense and myrrh, for example, were more than fragrant resins. They represented purification, protection, and divine presence. In many cultures, burning incense or consuming herbs with strong medicinal properties was believed to cleanse both the body and the spirit. The idea was that certain natural elements contained within them a force that could drive away impurity, whether physical or spiritual. The use of these substances in rituals was an acknowledgement that the physical world is imbued with spiritual properties, that what we eat and smell can shape our inner state just as much as our external surroundings. Even water, the simplest of all substances, carries deep symbolic meaning. It is the essence of life, the universal cleanser, the medium through which renewal takes place. In spiritual traditions across the world, water is used not only to quench thirst, but to purify, to reset, to prepare the soul for higher encounters. Holy water is not just physically refreshing. It represents the washing away of corruption, the creation of a new beginning. To drink pure water is to align oneself with the essence of clarity and renewal, reinforcing the idea that what we take into ourselves has the power to cleanse, protect, and sustain. Food, then, is not just a means of survival. It is a language, a vessel through which the divine communicates protection, wisdom, and guidance. The symbolic nature of holy foods reveals that what we eat can be a bridge between the material and the spiritual, a means of fortifying the soul against unseen adversities. These sacred provisions, revered throughout history, remind us that nourishment is more than sustenance. It is participation in a reality that extends beyond what we see, a reality where the sacred and the ordinary deeply intertwined. There is a battle that rages beyond the realm of human sight, a war fought not with swords and shields, but with forces that move in silence, seeking to corrupt, weaken, and ensnare. This war is not new, nor is it limited to moments of crisis. It has always existed, pressing against the boundaries of human will, testing the resilience of the soul. The ancients knew this well, even if they lacked the language of modern philosophy and psychology to articulate it. They understood that the world is not merely what is seen, but is also shaped by what remains unseen. The spiritual realm is not a distant, abstract idea. It is woven into the fabric of daily life, influencing the course of events, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the strength or fragility of a non-individual's inner world. The battle is subtle, moving through thoughts, habits, emotions, and even physical circumstances. It does not always announce itself with grand gestures. Often, it infiltrates through whispers, through slow, almost imperceptible compromises, through fatigue that is more than physical, and through discouragement that lingers without an obvious cause. The human soul, though resilient, is not immune to these attacks. Left undefended, it becomes vulnerable, susceptible to forces that seek to drain its strength, distort its perception, and ultimately sever it from the sources of truth and life. This is why, throughout history, spiritual traditions have emphasized the need for vigilance. The enemy, in an invisible war, does not strike where defenses are strong. It looks for the places left unguarded. A distracted mind, a complacent heart, a body weakened by disorder, these become entry points. It is no coincidence that fasting, dietary discipline, and sacred meals have been central to spiritual practices across cultures. Food is not only physical sustenance, but a means of fortification, a way of aligning oneself with order rather than chaos, with strength rather than vulnerability. The notion that holy foods serve as barriers against spiritual attack is not based on superstition, but on the recognition that the material world is infused with deeper significance. Just as certain physical actions can reinforce habits of the mind, certain foods can reinforce the spirit's defenses. When one partakes of food that has been consecrated, either by prayer, tradition, or its inherent properties, one is not merely feeding the body, but reinforcing the soul against encroaching darkness. These are not empty rituals. They are acts of resistance, deliberate choices to reject spiritual passivity and engage in the unseen struggle with clarity and strength. The forces of darkness do not strike openly. They do not announce their intentions in the way that human adversaries might. Instead, they seek to weaken the will, to cloud judgment, to plant seeds of discord and despair. A mind in confusion is easier to mislead. A body in disorder is easier to control. A soul in isolation is easier to conquer. This is why ancient wisdom teaches that protection begins not only in prayer, but in the way one lives, in the way one eats, in the way one approaches even the most ordinary aspects of existence. There is no part of life that is neutral in an invisible war. Every action either strengthens or weakens, either builds up or tears down. Consider the way hunger affects the mind. A starving man does not think clearly. He is easily driven by impulse, more susceptible to suggestion, less able to resist deception. This is not merely a biological truth, but a spiritual one. When the soul is starved, when it lacks the nourishment it needs, it too becomes weak. It becomes restless, seeking satisfaction in places where it will not find true sustenance. This is why food, particularly food that has been set apart as holy, plays a role in spiritual warfare. It is a reminder that the battle is not only waged externally but within, that strength comes not from momentary indulgence but from disciplined nourishment. Holy foods, those that have been recognized for their spiritual significance, do more than sustain the body. They serve as reminders, as symbols of alignment with what is good, as reinforcements against the slow erosion of faith and clarity. The act of eating, when done with intention, becomes more than a routine. It becomes a statement, a declaration that one is not merely drifting through life, but actively guarding what has been entrusted to them. It is no surprise, then, that many of these sacred foods are associated with purification, preservation, and healing. Salt, incorruptible and enduring, as being used to ward off decay and spiritual contamination. Honey, untouched by time, carries the essence of divine sweetness and incorruptibility. Bread, the most fundamental sustenance, represents provision that does not fail. Oil, used for anointing, signifies consecration and protection. Garlic, sharp and potent, has long been seen as a natural repellent of both physical and spiritual affliction. These foods are not simply practical choices. They are bearers of meaning, tools in the ongoing battle between light and darkness. The greatest mistake one can make in an invisible war is to assume that passivity ensures safety. The absence of visible conflict does not mean that no battle is taking place. Those who fall are often those who believe they are not in danger, those who do not see the slow encroachments of disorder until it has taken hold. The wise do not wait for signs of attack before preparing their defenses. They fortify themselves daily, knowing that resilience is not built in a moment of crisis, but through consistent, intentional action. Spiritual resistance, then, is not merely about avoiding harm. It is about strengthening what is good. It is about recognizing that every choice carries weight, that even the simplest habits, such as what one eats, play a role in shaping the soul's endurance. It is about understanding that food is not just for the body, but for the whole being, that what one consumes influences not only energy and health, but clarity of mind and purity of heart. There are those who dismiss such practices as symbolic at best, unnecessary at worst. But those who have walked the paths of wisdom know that the unseen war is real. They know that a life lived without awareness is a life left unguarded. And they understand that in a world where darkness seeks entry through the smallest of openings, even something as simple as a meal can be an act of defiance, a shield against forces that would seek to undo what is strong and good. The human body and soul are not separate entities existing in isolation. They are deeply intertwined, influencing each other in ways both visible and invisible. Throughout history, wisdom traditions have recognized that what is consumed physically has profound effects not only on health, but on the state of the spirit. Food is not merely fuel for the body, it is a means of sustaining the entire being, shaping the mind, emotions, and spiritual resilience. This understanding is not confined to one culture or faith, but is found in civilizations across the world, all of which recognize that the act of eating is more than a biological necessity. It is a sacred interaction with the world, a way of aligning oneself with forces of order or chaos, purity or corruption. It is no coincidence that many spiritual practices incorporate dietary laws, fasting, or rituals surrounding food. These traditions are not arbitrary rules, but reflections of a deeper truth, that the physical and spiritual are not separate realms, but one continuous reality. What enters the body affects not only energy and health, but also perception, willpower, and clarity of thought. A diet rooted in disorder, whether excessive indulgence, gluttony, or carelessness, does not only weaken the body, it erodes discipline, dulls awareness, and leaves the soul susceptible to influences that thrive in moments of weakness. Conversely, a diet grounded in intentionality, purity, and moderation strengthens not just the physical form, but the inner world as well, creating a foundation upon which resilience is built. Consider the way fasting has been practiced for millennia as a means of spiritual purification. To abstain from food for a time is not merely to deny oneself pleasure, it is to refine the will, to sharpen focus, to break free from the distractions that dull spiritual sensitivity. The body, when deprived of excess, begins to recalibrate, and in doing so, the soul becomes more attuned to truths that are often drowned out in times of indulgence. This is not because hunger itself is holy, but because disciplined restraint from impulsive gratification strengthens one's capacity to discern, to resist, and to maintain sovereignty over one's own nature. Those who master their appetites find it easier to master their thoughts, emotions, and responses to the challenges of life. Holy foods, then, are not simply those that nourish the body, they are those that nourish the soul. They are substances that carry within them properties of preservation, purification, and endurance. Salt, for example, has been revered not only for its ability to prevent decay, but for its symbolic connection to integrity and steadfastness. It does not spoil, it does not rot, it preserves, it endures. To consume salt with awareness is to align oneself with these very attributes, reinforcing the soul's ability to withstand corruption. In many traditions, salt has been used in blessings and purification rituals, sprinkled in sacred spaces and across thresholds to ward off malevolent forces. Its presence is a reminder that just as physical corruption must be resisted, so too must spiritual decay be guarded against. Likewise, honey has been seen as more than a sweetener. Its incorruptibility, it does not spoil, even over centuries, has made it a symbol of divine wisdom and favor. In many cultures, it has been associated with enlightenment, clarity, and the sweetness of truth. To partake of honey is to ingest something that represents the eternal, a taste of what is untainted by time and corruption. It is no wonder that honey has been used in sacred rites, offered to the divine, and revered as a food that strengthens the inner self. Those who consume it with understanding are reminded that sweetness is not simply a pleasure, but can be a gift of wisdom, a nourishment that strengthens rather than weakens. Bread, the most fundamental of foods, holds a unique place in the connection between physical and spiritual nourishment. It is the universal sustenance, a food so essential that it has become synonymous with survival itself. But bread is more than mere sustenance. It represents provision, the continuous care that sustains not only the body, but the soul. It is made from the grains of the earth, ground and transformed through fire into something new, much like the process of spiritual refinement. Bread is a communal food, one that is broken and shared, reinforcing the idea that nourishment is not meant to be hoarded, but given, that sustenance is strongest when it fosters unity. To eat bread is to participate in something ancient, something that connects the individual to the greater whole. Oil, particularly olive oil, carries within it the essence of anointing and consecration. It has been used for millennia in sacred rituals, poured over kings, priests, and altars as a mark of divine selection and protection. To consume oil is to partake in this legacy, to ingest something that has long been associated with endurance and sacred purpose. The olive tree, known for its resilience, stands as a symbol of peace and strength, and its fruit, when pressed, yields oil that has been used not only for sustenance, but for healing and sanctification. Those who understand this do not merely see oil as a cooking ingredient, but as a representation of consecration, a substance that reminds them that their bodies, too, are vessels of something greater. Even the simplest of substances, water, carries profound spiritual significance. It is the foundation of life, the element that cleanses, renews, and sustains. It is no accident that sacred traditions place such emphasis on water as a medium of purification. To drink pure water is to partake in renewal, to align oneself with the essence of clarity and restoration. Water washes away impurities, both physically and symbolically, and its absence leads to desolation. Just as the body cannot survive without it, the soul, too, withers in its absence. Those who drink with awareness recognize that water is more than a drink-it, is a reminder of the necessity of continual renewal, of keeping the soul refreshed and unburdened by corruption. The interplay between physical and spiritual nourishment is evident in the way these sacred foods have been used throughout history. They are not merely relics of tradition, but bearers of wisdom, reminders that what one consumes shapes more than the body, it shapes the very essence of who one becomes. The body is not a separate entity from the soul, but a vessel through which spiritual realities manifest. If one is careless with physical sustenance, one risks disorder in all aspects of life. But if one approaches food with reverence, with understanding, and with discipline, it becomes more than nourishment. It becomes a means of strengthening the will, sharpening perception, and reinforcing the spirit against the forces that seek to weaken it. Food, when understood in this way, ceases to be a mundane necessity and becomes an act of alignment. It becomes a choice between strength and weakness, between order and disorder, between clarity and confusion. It is not merely about what is eaten, but how it is eaten, with what intention and with what awareness. Those who recognize this truth do not eat mindlessly. They partake with reverence, knowing that nourishment is more than physical. It is a preparation, a defense, and a means of standing firm in a world where unseen forces seek to erode what is good. Purity has always been the foundation of spiritual strength. It is not merely a moral ideal, but a force that fortifies the soul against corruption. Throughout history, those who sought to maintain spiritual integrity understood that the presence of impurity, even in its subtlest forms, weakens the soul's defenses. Impurity is not always an obvious stain. It often begins as a quiet erosion, a slow drift from clarity to confusion, from strength to weakness. This is why purity is not just an aspiration, but a necessity, a shield against the forces that seek to infiltrate and dismantle one's inner fortitude. The role of purity in protection is evident in the way spiritual traditions emphasize cleansing, not just of the mind and heart, but of the body as well. The physical and spiritual are deeply connected, and what is allowed into the body has consequences beyond mere nutrition. This is why dietary laws, fasting, and the consumption of sacred foods have been central to spiritual practices across cultures. The act of eating is not neutral. It is a choice between nourishing what is strong or feeding what is weak, between reinforcing defenses or allowing slow deterioration. Purity in diet reflects purity in spirit. What one consumes becomes part of their being, shaping their resilience against forces that seek to corrupt. Food, when consecrated, carries within it the essence of order and sanctity. To eat something that has been set apart, blessed, or purified is to participate in that sanctity, to align oneself with forces that strengthen rather than weaken. This is why certain foods have been regarded as weapons against spiritual attack, not because they possess magic, but because they symbolize and embody purity. Salt, for example, is incorruptible. It does not decay, it does not rot, and it preserves whenever it touches. It is a reminder that purity is not passive, it actively resists corruption. To consume salt with awareness is to reinforce the soul's ability to withstand decay, to resist the forces that seek to break it down. Likewise, honey has long been associated with divine purity. It does not spoil, it does not ferment like other substances, and its sweetness is natural, untainted by artificiality. Honey is often seen as a gift from the divine, a symbol of wisdom and spiritual nourishment. Its incorruptibility is a reflection of the state the soul must strive for, a state of being untouchable by the forces of decay. Those who partake of it with understanding recognize that they are not merely consuming food, but reinforcing a spiritual principle, that what is pure endures, that what is untainted remains strong. Oil, particularly olive oil, carries within it the essence of consecration. It has been used to anoint, to set apart, to mark that which is sacred. It is not only consumed, but applied, symbolizing the presence of divine protection. To ingest oil is to take in something that has long been associated with healing, resilience, and the ability to withstand affliction. The olive tree, known for its endurance, produces fruit that, when pressed, yields an essence that has been used to mark kings, priests, and warriors. Those who consume oil with awareness recognize that they are ingesting something that has long been tied to purity and divine favor. Bread, too, is not simply sustenance. It is a symbol of provision, of continuity, of something that sustains without corruption. In many traditions, bread is seen as holy, broken and shared as an act of communion. It represents a form of sustenance that nourishes without defilement, reinforcing the idea that true strength comes from what is pure and given freely. To eat bread that has been blessed is to partake in a form of nourishment that carries spiritual significance. It is a reminder that what sustains the body must also sustain the soul, and that purity in sustenance leads to purity in thought, in action, and in resilience. Water, the most fundamental of substances, is the ultimate symbol of purification. It washes away impurity, it renews, it refreshes. To drink pure water is to partake in renewal, to align oneself with the cleansing forces that maintain clarity and strength. This is why water has been central to spiritual rituals. Purification is not a one-time act, but an ongoing necessity. Just as the body must be cleansed regularly, so too must the soul be refreshed, rid of the subtle impurities that accumulate over time. Those who drink with awareness recognize that water is more than a substance. It is an agent of renewal, a means of maintaining the clarity that is essential in spiritual warfare. Garlic, often dismissed as mere superstition, carries within it properties that have long been associated with purification and protection. Its strong aroma, its potency, its sharpness, all of these characteristics mirror the qualities that repel corruption. Just as its presence in the physical world repels decay and disease, so too has it been seen as a force that drives away spiritual contamination. The strong, the pure, the unyielding, these are the qualities that protect against forces that seek to weaken. Garlic, then, is not merely a food, but a reminder that strength repels weakness, that what is potent resists dissolution. The significance of purity and protection is not a matter of superstition, but of deep, ancient wisdom. Those who allow impurity into their lives, whether through indulgence, carelessness, or ignorance, find themselves slowly weakened, their defenses eroded. It is not always an immediate attack. Often, it is a gradual loss of clarity, a slow drift into disorder. But those who guard their purity, who recognize that what enters the body affects the whole being, are fortified against such erosion. They understand that food is more than sustenance. It is a tool of alignment, a means of reinforcing spiritual resilience. The mistake many make is in assuming that purity is restrictive, that it is merely a set of rules to follow. But purity is not about limitation, it is about strength. It is about maintaining what is whole, guarding what is valuable, ensuring that the forces of disorder do not gain a foothold. Just as a well-fortified city does not allow its gates to remain open to any traveler, so too must the soul be guarded. Purity is the wall that prevents intrusion, the shield that deflects attack, the foundation that ensures stability. In an age where indulgence is often mistaken for freedom, the wisdom of purity is more necessary than ever. The forces that seek to weaken do not announce themselves with grand gestures. They creep in slowly, subtly, unnoticed. But those who understand the role of purity and protection remain vigilant. They recognize that what is taken in, whether through food, through thought, through action, shapes the whole of one's being. And they choose, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, to fortify themselves with what is holy, what is incorruptible, what stands against the forces that would seek to unravel them. Discipline has always been the defining trait of those who seek strength, whether in the physical, mental, or spiritual realms. It is not merely a matter of restraint, but of intentionality, of choosing what strengthens over what weakens, what builds over what erodes. The act of consumption is one of the most overlooked aspects of spiritual discipline, yet it plays a critical role in determining one's resilience. What enters the body affects the mind, the emotions, and ultimately the soul. Those who approach food with discipline understand that nourishment is not simply about sustaining life, but about fortifying the self against unseen forces that seek to exploit weakness. Consumption without discipline is an open door. It allows indulgence to take the place of sustenance, desire to override necessity, and excess to dull awareness. Many do not realize that the way they eat, what they consume, and how they approach nourishment reflects deeper spiritual truths. The body, like the mind, must be trained it, must be kept in order, in balance, in readiness. When discipline is abandoned, when one eats without awareness or care, the body becomes sluggish, the mind clouded, the spirit dulled. This is why fasting, moderation, and mindful consumption have been hallmarks of those who seek spiritual fortification. They are not acts of deprivation, but of refinement, of sharpening one's defenses against forces that thrive in disorder. Fasting, in particular, has been recognized across cultures as a means of breaking free from physical dependence and cultivating spiritual strength. To willingly deny the body excess is to assert control over the self, to refuse to be governed by base appetites. It is a reminder that strength does not come from abundance, but from mastery. The ability to say no to indulgence, to recognize when the body needs restraint rather than gratification, is one of the greatest shields against spiritual attack. It is in moments of hunger that clarity often emerges, that the noise of constant consumption fades, allowing one to perceive with greater sharpness. Those who practice discipline in their diet understand that self-mastery is the foundation of all other forms of strength. This is why certain foods have been regarded as spiritually protective, not because they contain mystical properties, but because they embody discipline. Holy foods, those that have been revered across traditions, are not extravagant. They are simple, pure, and often require patience and effort to prepare. Bread, for example, is the most fundamental of foods, yet it requires labor to create. It must be mixed, kneaded, allowed to rise, and baked. It is not instant, nor does it gratify immediately. It teaches patience, effort, and appreciation for sustenance that is earned rather than simply taken. Those who consume it with awareness recognize that their nourishment is not to be taken lightly, that what sustains them requires care and intention. Salt, another fundamental element, is not merely an additive but a preserver. It protects against decay, prevents corruption, and enhances what is already present. In the same way, discipline in consumption acts as a safeguard, preventing the gradual decline into excess and disorder. Those who consume with restraint, who choose what strengthens over what merely satisfies, embody the very principle of preservation. They do not allow themselves to be ruled by impulse, by cravings that lead to weakness. Instead, they maintain the purity of their sustenance, ensuring that what enters their bodies aligns with what strengthens their souls. Honey, though sweet, is not an indulgence in the same way as artificial confections. It is a natural gift, untainted, requiring patience to obtain. It is created through labor, through a process that transforms what is raw into something nourishing and incorruptible. Those who understand discipline in consumption do not reject sweetness, but choose the kind that fortifies rather than weakens. They recognize that true pleasure is not found in mindless indulgence, but in partaking of what is pure, of what has been cultivated with care. Honey, in this sense, is a lesson that teaches that sweetness is not the enemy, but that it must come from a place of wisdom, from sources that do not lead to decay. Olive oil, pressed from a tree that endures through time, is another emblem of discipline. It is extracted through pressure, through a refining process that mirrors the refining of the soul. It does not spoil easily, it does not yield to corruption, and it has being used for anointing, for healing, for strengthening. Those who consume it understand that it represents endurance, that it is a reflection of resilience cultivated through discipline. Just as the olive must be pressed to yield its essence, so too must the individual undergo trials to emerge stronger. To partake of it is to acknowledge that strength is not instant, that resilience is built through pressure, through patience, through refinement. Water, the most essential element of all, teaches perhaps the greatest lesson of discipline. It is the simplest of substances, yet without it, life withers. It cleanses, it refreshes, and it sustains without excess. To drink pure water is to understand that the most vital nourishment often comes from what is most basic. Many seek elaborate solutions to their weaknesses, when often the answer lies in returning to what is pure, what is necessary, what is fundamental. Those who drink with awareness recognize that discipline is not about deprivation, but about alignment, about returning to what is needed rather than what is simply desired. Garlic, strong and sharp, has long been associated with protection. Its potency is undeniable. It does not blend into the background, but asserts itself boldly. In the same way, discipline in consumption is not passive. It is an active choice, a deliberate stance against indulgence that weakens. Those who consume garlic understand that strength has a taste, that protection is not always mild and gentle, but sometimes requires boldness, sharpness, and assertion of will. It is a reminder that discipline itself is a repellent to forces that seek to undermine, that a life of order does not easily allow entry to chaos. The discipline of consumption is a spiritual shield because it reinforces control over the self. It teaches that what is taken in shapes the whole being, that food is more than sustenance, it is a means of alignment, a tool of fortification. Those who consume without thought, who indulge without restraint, leave themselves open to slow erosion. But those who eat with awareness, who recognize that nourishment is an act of discipline, cultivate a strength that extends beyond the physical. They understand that every choice, every meal, every act of consumption is an opportunity to reinforce resilience, to stand firm against forces that seek to weaken. It is not enough to avoid what is overtly harmful. One must also be mindful of how even good things can become sources of weakness if approached without discipline. Too much sweetness dulls the palate. Too much ease weakens endurance. Strength comes not from excess, but from balance, from knowing when to partake and when to abstain. Those who master their consumption master themselves, and in doing so, they build a defense that cannot be easily broken. They do not live at the mercy of appetite, but in command of their own will, fortified by choices that strengthen rather than diminish.